Welcome back to the deep dive. We are thrilled to have the learner with us today because we've got a really intense topic lined up.
We really do. It's one of those things that sounds like fiction until you look at the data.
Right. So I want you to imagine something. You've worked hard your entire life. You saved diligently for retirement, built up a really nice nest egg.
Mm.
But then in your twilight years, you develop mild dementia. And suddenly, a judge just hands total legal control of your money and your life decisions over to a complete stranger.
A total stranger. Yeah.
Right. And this stranger legally forbids you from buying a plane ticket to see your grandkids. They deny your request to fix a leaky roof. They won't even let you withdraw basic spending cash.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. And why do they do this? Because the larger your stagnant bank account remains, the higher the monthly fee this stranger gets to collect from it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like some dystopian novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what you're describing is the everyday, heavily documented reality for thousands of families navigating Japan's adult guardianship system.
Exactly. And that is what we are digging into today. Our source material is this translated presentation script that details the stark realities of this system. In Japan, it's known as the Seinen Koken Saido.
Right, Seinen Koken Saido.
Yeah. And it was explicitly designed to be the safety net to protect vulnerable people, like those with dementia. But structurally, in practice, it basically traps them. It completely strips away their autonomy.
So our mission today is to explore exactly how this happens. We're going to look at how good intentions in legal frameworks can inadvertently create these massive perverse incentives.
Right.
We'll examine why this specifically matters to you and your own future planning, and how a system that's meant to protect a person's life actually just ends up restricting it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how we ended up with these, court-appointed wardens managing people's wealth, we have to look at what they were actually trying to fix in the first place.
Right, the history of it.
Yeah. Where did the system actually come from?
Well, the current iteration of the system kicked off in the year 2000. And it was brought in to replace a much older, incredibly restrictive framework known as the incompetent or quasi-incompetent system.
I mean, just the name alone, right? Quasi-incompetent. That tells you a lot about how they viewed cognitive decline back then.
Absolutely. It was incredibly draconian.
What did that older system actually do to a person legally?
Basically, if you were declared incompetent due to mental or physical disabilities, you essentially lost your legal personhood.
Wow.
Yeah. You couldn't sign contracts, you couldn't manage your own property, and your basic civic rights were just severely curtailed. It was purely about restriction and control.
So entering the year 2000, Japan decides to modernize. They look at these international trends regarding human rights, and they decide, hey, we need a system built on respecting human dignity.
Exactly. That was the stated goal.
Right. And the source notes they created 3 different categories of support depending on the person's actual capability, right?
Correct. They wanted some nuance. So they created guardianship for individuals with almost no judgment capacity.
Okay.
Then curatorship for those whose capacity is significantly insufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, assistance for those where it's only partially insufficient.
Got it. So the idea was you wouldn't just strip away all their rights at once.
Right. You'd assign someone to help manage their affairs based on the exact level of need.
And who are the people assigned to actually do this? The source mentions relatives, but it also repeatedly mentions legal professionals. Lawyers, social workers, and judicial scriveners.
Right, the professionals.
Actually, let's pause right there. Because for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the Japanese legal system, what exactly is a judicial scrivener? Is that just a lawyer?
Not quite. A judicial scrivener is a highly specialized legal professional in Japan. They primarily focus on things like real estate registration, corporate registration, and preparing legal docs for court.
Okay, so they're not the ones doing criminal trials.
No. But they are deeply embedded in property and family law logistics. So naturally, when the courts needed professionals to manage estates and property, they turned to judicial scriveners and lawyers.
Okay, so on paper, this 2000 reform sounds like a massive step forward, like going from a flip phone to a smartphone.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You have a tiered system, you have legal experts stepping in to help, and the goal is protecting the vulnerable from scams. But the source material completely tears into how this operates in practice. It's like the operating system is still stuck in the past.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the fundamental flaw was a matter of design focus.
How so?
Well, The architects of the year 2000 law were so hyper-focused on correcting the specific problem of financial fraud.
Like an elderly person getting scammed out of their house.
Exactly. They were so focused on that, they built the entire apparatus around property management. Locking down the assets became the overriding priority.
Over their actual life.
Right. It completely overshadowed the individual's actual will, their desires, and their daily quality of life. The legal world basically dragged that old control-based mindset into the present.
So they successfully built an impenetrable vault to protect the money, but they locked the human being inside it.
Precisely. And this leads us to the critical threshold, which is how people actually enter this vault.
Right, the two routes.
Yeah. The source explains there are two distinct routes into the guardianship system. There's statutory guardianship and voluntary guardianship.
And understanding the difference between those two is basically the whole ballgame. Because one is a choice and the other is a trap.
That's exactly. Statutory guardianship is the default route. This is when the family court appoints a guardian after the individual has already lost their cognitive judgment capacity.
After the fact.
Right. Whereas voluntary guardianship is a proactive contract made before the capacity is lost. That's where the individual explicitly chooses who will manage their affairs.
But the source points out that human nature just completely sabotages families here. I mean, most people don't even look into guardianship until a crisis hits.
Oh, almost never.
It's like a sudden severe stroke, an accident, or a dementia diagnosis reaches a tipping point where the family suddenly needs to sell the elderly parent's house to pay for a care facility.
And by the time that crisis hits, the window for choice is slammed shut.
Because they can't legally sign anything.
Exactly. Legally, the individual no longer has the recognized capacity to sign a voluntary contract. So the family is forced to petition the family court for statutory guardianship.
Which means the court takes over. But wait, let me push back a little here on behalf of the listener. Because the source paints this picture of the court just indiscriminately handing control to random strangers instead of family members. Surely these professionals aren't all just greedy villains. Doesn't the court have a reason for sidelining the family? Isn't their strictness coming from a genuine fear of families financially abusing their own elderly parents?
Oh, for sure. You're hitting on the exact justification the courts use.
Because family embezzlement has to be a real risk.
It is. Historically, there were significant issues with family members quietly draining an elderly parent's bank account or, fighting over inheritance prematurely.
Right.
Because of that genuine risk, the family court heavily overcorrected. Their default is increasingly to view family members with suspicion.
So they just appoint an outsider.
Right. They appoint these external professionals, the lawyers and judicial scriveners, because they assume the professional will be a neutral, objective manager of the property.
Wait, so if my loved one gets dementia, and we haven't set this up beforehand, the court just assigns a stranger, and we have absolutely no say in it.
That is exactly what happens. The family is entirely sidelined in their own parents' or spouse's life. The court assigns a total stranger who now has final legal say over the individual's assets and living arrangements.
That is terrifying.
It really is. And what's fascinating here is the psychological barrier that prevents people from avoiding this trap.
Because they just don't want to think about getting old.
Exactly. A proactive alternative absolutely exists. You could set up a voluntary guardianship right now, or you could set up a family trust via a trust bank purely for property management while you're still sharp.
Right.
But doing so requires sitting down and confronting your own inevitable physical and mental decline. It's an incredibly uncomfortable conversation that most people just put off until tomorrow.
Right. We avoid the ego death of admitting we might lose our minds, and as a result, we surrender control of our lives to a stranger by default.
Completely by default.
Okay, so now we have this objective, court-appointed professional in charge. How do these professional guardians actually get paid? Because this is the core structural flaw the source author highlights.
This is where that initial design focus on property management becomes an absolute nightmare for the individual.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. The professional guardian's monthly remuneration is not a flat fee. It is tied directly to the ward's bank balance.
Okay, I want to read the specific numbers the source provided from the Tokyo Family Court's baseline operations because it makes the mechanics of this so stark.
Go for it.
So if the managed assets are under 10 million yen, the guardian gets about 20,000 yen a month.
Right.
If the assets sit between 10 million and 50 million yen, the fee bumps up to between 30,000 and 40,000 yen a month. And if the assets are over 50 million yen, The guardian takes home 50,000 to 60,000 yen every single month.
Look at the undeniable incentive structure that creates. The guardian's income explicitly increases or is maintained at its highest possible tier only if the ward's bank balance remains untouched.
It's insane. It's exactly like hiring a personal trainer who gets paid a hefty bonus every month that you don't lose weight.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. The system actively financially incentivizes the professional to do the exact opposite of what is actually good for your life. It's an outrage.
It is the textbook definition of a perverse incentive.
Yeah.
I mean, the stated goal of the 2000 reform was respecting the person's will and improving their life. But a professional guardian looks at the court's mandate to not reduce property, and then they look at their own sliding scale paycheck.
And the paycheck wins.
Every time. Those two factors completely override the human element. The individual's money is protected, sure, but their life is ruined.
And the real-world results detailed in the source are just heartbreaking. I mean, we aren't talking about guardians preventing elderly people from buying sports cars.
No, not at all.
They are actively rejecting expenses that would bring the person joy or basic comfort. They just label them as wasteful.
Yes. If the elderly person wants to take a final trip to a hot spring, the guardian denies it because it drains capital.
Wow.
Spending money on a lifelong hobby, denied. Repairing a crumbling family home, denied.
Unbelievable.
The source even notes that guardians frequently reject requests from the family to hire additional out-of-pocket care services that would make the ward's daily life more comfortable.
Wait, so they literally veto better health care to keep the bank balance artificially high?
Yes.
The source even says they sometimes refuse basic cash withdrawals. It is outrageous. They're basically held financially hostage.
Which brings us to a glaring question about the system itself. If guardians are legally hoarding wealth and denying basic life expenses, how does the court allow this?
Right. That was my immediate thought. The court appointed them, so the court must supervise them, right? There has to be an oversight mechanism.
You would think so.
If a judicial scrivener is starving a 50 million yen estate of basic joy, shouldn't a judge notice?
Well, the source explicitly calls out this systemic failure of oversight. First, you have to understand the timeline. Once a professional is appointed to a statutory guardianship, it's almost never temporary.
Right. It usually lasts until the ward dies. It's a lifetime appointment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the source points out that this creates a highly stable, long-term income source for these professionals. We're talking hundreds of thousands to over 1 million yen annually per case.
And if they have dozens of clients, that is a massively lucrative, guaranteed revenue stream. It's a vested interest.
It has evolved into a full-fledged industry. And as for the court's oversight, it relies almost entirely on paper checks. Once a year, the guardian submits a ledger.
Wait, they just look at a spreadsheet, they don't visit the house, they don't interview the elderly person to see if they're happy or well cared for?
No. The family court judges and clerks are incredibly overworked. They just do not have the resources to conduct real-world welfare checks.
That is why.
They just look at the math. Did the balance go down? If yes, is there a stamped receipt proving it was a necessary medical or tax expense?
Wow.
Yeah. If the ledger balances and the money hasn't shrunk unnecessarily, the court signs off. The court has absolutely no mechanism to grasp the physical, emotional reality of the ward's life.
But even with that strict focus on the ledger, the source highlights something baffling. Embezzlement by these professional guardians still happens every single year.
Yes, it does.
We are talking about theft ranging from millions to hundreds of millions of yen. There are cases where professional lawyers have received actual prison sentences of over 4 years for draining these estates.
That's a huge problem.
How can a legal system allow lawyers to essentially siphon funds with zero real-world check-ins on the human beings they're supposed to protect? If the court is so hyper-focused on the math, how are lawyers still stealing?
Well, this raises an important question about how institutional inertia works and the danger of absolute authority.
Right.
When a guardian has total control over the bank accounts, they can forge receipts, create ghost expenses, or simply transfer funds and cook the books before that annual review.
Because they're the only ones with access.
Exactly. And because the court assumes the professional is objective, they often don't scrutinize them as harshly as they would a family member.
So the system operates on a baseline of trusting the professional while actively distrusting the family.
Yes. And when a legal system becomes a reliable, massive revenue stream for the very professionals tasked with operating it, the internal motivation to reform that system just vanishes.
Right. Why fix what's making you rich?
Exactly. The lawyers, the scriveners, the courts, they're all accustomed to the status quo. The system works perfectly for the managers, even if it is completely failing the managed.
It's a closed loop of vested interests. All right, we've diagnosed the disease here, and it is a bleak picture. But the source material doesn't just lay out the problem, it attempts to offer a cure. Let's move into the proposed solutions.
Let's do it.
The author outlines several major systemic fixes, but the most foundational one is completely overhauling the remuneration system, right?
Yes. They argue that a guardian's pay must be decoupled from the bank balance entirely.
Which makes perfect sense. Break the perverse incentive.
Exactly. Instead, pay should be based on the actual workload and the guardian's demonstrable contribution to improving the person's life.
But practically speaking, how on earth do you quantify life improvement for a fee? I mean, how does an overworked court clerk look at a file and say, yes, you brought this person 30,000 yen worth of joy this month?
It is a massive administrative challenge, for sure, which is why the author pairs that solution with a shift toward supported decision-making.
Supported decision-making, what does that mean in this context?
Well, they cite the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It emphasizes that the legal framework has to shift from substitute decision-making, where the guardian just decides what's best, to supported decision-making. That's where the guardian's legal mandate is, specifically to help the individual express and execute their own will.
So the metric of success changes from did you protect the money to did you facilitate the person's actual desires?
Exactly.
And to do that, the source argues we need to break the monopoly that legal professionals currently hold by actively supporting relative guardians. They suggest providing family members with dedicated training and consultation windows.
Right. If the court is afraid of family members making accounting mistakes, train them, rather than immediately outsourcing to a stranger.
But what about the embezzlement risk with families?
To ensure that family members or professionals, for that matter, aren't embezzling, the author proposes implementing independent third-party audits outside of the family courts entirely.
See, third-party audits sound fantastic on paper. You get a totally external set of eyes to review the ledgers and the living conditions. But my immediate pushback is, who pays for that? Does the cost of the auditor come out of the elderly person's dwindling estate? Or does the state fund an entire new bureaucratic wing of auditors?
And that is the friction point of reform. Funding external oversight requires political will that currently just doesn't exist.
Right.
But perhaps the most radical structural change the author proposes is ending the lifetime appointments.
Oh, this was huge.
Yeah. They suggest making guardianship a 2 to 3 year renewal system.
Meaning the guardian essentially has to reapply for their job. They have to prove to the court every couple of years that they are actively improving the ward's life. If they aren't, they get replaced.
It perfectly aligns the guardian's continued employment with the actual well-being of the individual.
But again, think about the logistics. You just mentioned the family courts are drowning in cases. If every single guardianship in Japan requires a full qualitative lifestyle review every 2 years, the court system would collapse under the paperwork.
Which is exactly why the author believes the solution cannot just be a few tweaks to court procedure. It requires a fundamental paradigm shift in how the law views cognitive decline and human rights.
The systemic fixes are going to be a steep uphill battle. And I think the author knows that because the presentation script ends on a very personal, sobering note.
Because
The author mentions being single, and they write that originally they thought this adult guardianship system would be their ultimate safety net.
right, the assumption being if I get old and my mind starts to slip, the state will step in and take care of me.
But researching this system completely shattered that illusion for them. It exposed the severe, life-altering danger of waiting until after a cognitive event to designate a guardian.
So what does this all mean for the listener?
Yeah, so what does this all mean? It means your ultimate defense isn't crossing your fingers and hoping the government passes sweeping legal reforms before you or your parents get old.
No, definitely not.
The defense is taking proactive steps right now while you still have full agency.
Knowledge is only truly valuable when it is applied. Understanding the structural flaws of the Japanese guardianship system is an interesting intellectual exercise, sure. But its real value is if it prompts you to initiate those difficult, highly uncomfortable conversations with your own family today, regardless of where you live.
You have to look into voluntary guardianship. Look into family trusts.
Precisely. You must map out your wishes, decide who you trust, and legally bind them to those roles before a crisis occurs.
Before it's too late.
Because if you wait for the stroke or the dementia diagnosis, the system defaults. And as we've seen, it defaults to treating you as an asset to be managed, rather than a human being to be lived.
It's a heavy realization, but an empowering one if you act on it. So just to recap our journey today, we started by looking at a well-intentioned reform from the year 2000, designed to upgrade an oppressive old law and protect human dignity.
Right.
But we explored how a fundamental design flaw, focusing almost exclusively on property management, created a system absolutely riddled with perverse financial incentives.
We saw how professional guardians, like lawyers and judicial scriveners, are literally financially rewarded for restricting a vulnerable person's life, and how this is overseen by an overworked court system suffering from extreme institutional inertia.
And most importantly, we highlighted the crucial, life-changing difference between statutory preparation, waiting until the court makes the choice for you, and voluntary preparation.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, slightly unconventional thought to ponder.
Okay, I love these.
We've spent this entire deep dive dissecting the immense danger of human guardians having conflicting financial incentives regarding your wealth, right?
Right. We've talked about human greed, institutional laziness, the perverse incentives of a sliding scale fee.
Right, the human element is the point of failure. But looking just a little bit into the future, what if guardianship transitions away from human professionals entirely and is handed over to artificial intelligence?
Wow, okay.
Think about the mechanics of it. If an AI system could be securely fed decades of your emails, your purchases, your daily habits, your travel history.
Everything.
Yeah, it could perfectly map your exact preferences, your values, and your risk tolerance before you lose cognitive function.
That's fascinating.
So if that technology existed and was legally recognized, would you feel safer in trusting your life, your joy, and your finances to an emotionless algorithm that requires no monthly salary and has zero conflicting financial incentives?
Wow.
Or, despite everything we've learned today about human flaws, would you still prefer a human being making the final call?
That is a genuinely profound question to chew on. The ultimate trust exercise between human bureaucracy and an algorithmic safety net. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take this knowledge, start those uncomfortable conversations with your family, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next one.